All right. Welcome to Good Energy, Anne. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
The way we've been starting these off is having our guests tell us your full name, your company, a little bit about your company and the role that you have.
Sure. So I'm Ann Hoskins. I joined Generac 2 years ago, almost exactly. And Generac, many people know as really a resiliency energy provider. It's been around for 65 years. And I'm not sure where to look here.
Just
Straight
Anywhere you
ahead,
either way,
maybe?
yeah.
65 years, started out with a single entrepreneur. I don't know if you called them entrepreneurs at the time.
Yeah.
But we're the leading, known really as a leading generator, backup power, consumer power organization company. And about, I'd say, 5 or 6 years ago, they really started to expand into a number of other. They've always expanded over the 65 years into new products, but really very intentionally to expand into other types of resiliency and energy management products. And those include batteries, inverters, controls, multiple types of control systems, smart thermostats, EV chargers, and most recently microgrid controllers. So we are really becoming a leading company internationally. We have international operations in Europe, in South America, really around the world, that are really to support reliability and resiliency. So my job, I came on to develop and create a public policy organization. So we do have a public policy and market development team. We're very focused on our energy technology sector, which is both for industrial as well as residential. And it's really trying to help the company gain access to some of the incentives that have come out through the federal legislation 2.5 years ago. As well as to really work in key, leading states around the country to encourage them to provide incentives for clean energy solutions, resiliency solutions, very similar to the work I did before. Before coming to Generac, I led the policy team at Sunrun. I was a regulator on the Maryland Public Service Commission. I led a policy
excellent.
team for a utility. So I've pretty much been on many sides of these energy transition issues. And it's just very exciting, to be at a company like Generac, which is building solutions, expanding and helping, really being the example of the energy transition.
Yeah, so I love that you sort of framed Generac's history as sort of a resilience company. And I think we've seen, especially over the last few years, a growing emphasis on that as a solution or as a problem that clean energy can solve, right? So that it's not just a climate solution, it's not just a sort of cost-saving solution, but it's a resilience and reliability solution. So how does Generac sort of see? I would imagine that you have sort of a competitive edge in that landscape since you've been in this space for such a long time, and your customers sort of associate Generac with as a resilient solution. So when you think about kind of talking to customers or talking to potential customers about the storage solutions or the EV solutions, like how are you communicating about those technologies as a resilience option?
Right. It's really, I think Generac is really very well positioned to really expand the reach of to customers that maybe hadn't been looking at batteries and solar and EV chargers and EV systems, because traditionally, if you just look in the United States, Generac has thousands of dealers across the country, where small communities in rural America, people that have been very dependent on generators for resiliency. If there's
My
been
parents are one of those people.
Mine too.
exactly, everybody I meet has somebody who knows somebody, and Generac has become like Kleenex, right? Like it's a term for a generator. But it's because people have felt either they're living in a rural area or they're in a place where they have had an experience of a major outage and they've gone to a generator. And, I think that generators will continue to play a really important role for a long time. I was just talking to a colleague about this tragedy down here in California in Rancho Palos Verdes, where the utilities have had to shut off all power, had to shut off all gas. impacted the water systems. And, there has been an important role for portable generators, but I think we also now know that you can also then connect those to batteries. You can get rooftop solar on people's homes very quickly, if the utilities want to work with us on that. And so together, you can have a broader range of solutions that can deal with the situation at hand. One of the things I'm really excited about is at the show this week, on Tuesday, Generac announced our new generation of our residential battery. It's a larger battery than other batteries on the market, 18 kilowatt hours. And so it really is a battery really designed for home backup, but it's also a battery that can work with a generator. So you could have that one 18 kilowatt hour battery that is the first line of defense, and that could also be used for cost reasons, right? You could be connected to solar, so you could manage your rate situation. But if you did have an extended outage, it could be connected to your generator that could serve as a further backup. So maybe you weren't going to have 3 or 4 batteries, which some people are feeling they need right now,
Right.
just to deal with the ongoing resiliency problems that we have. So we're seeing that, there are the technologies that we're developing can really meet people where they are, who are increasingly worrying on resilience. They want to have an affordable solution, and there's the possibility of using some of these older technologies with newer technologies, and hopefully really expanding the market of people who will now feel comfortable investing in resiliency and really trust it.
Right. We know what we're talking about here, right? We see the power outages after heat waves and hurricanes and blizzards. But I wondered if you could put just a little bit of a finer point on what this means for people, what this type of product can mean for people who live in those vulnerable communities, and who face these challenges every day. What happens when your refrigerator's not working?
Right.
What happens when your air conditioner turns off?
Well, exactly. And I think the example I'd point to first is Puerto Rico. And, Generac is very privileged to have been selected as one of the 2 companies that received the first round of resiliency funding from the U.S. Department of Energy. And we are now starting to put solar and battery systems on homes of low income and the remote customers who are either in the most remote locations in Puerto Rico or have some other type of serious resiliency challenge, whether they have a medical issue or they've just been very, very hard to serve. And as we know, Puerto Rico, I first got involved in Puerto Rico really when I was at Sunrun after Hurricane Maria, and we decided to go down and enter that market. And I'm just really proud that now I'm at Generac, and they already played a really important role with generators in Puerto Rico after Maria and otherwise, but Generac now has really redoubled our commitment to Puerto Rico and being a really big solution provider because, Puerto Rico has so much further to go in building its distribution network, rebuilding it.
Right.
And so if you do not have, and as well as its transmission network, right, and even utility scale solutions. So, but we know that we can serve customers in a day or 2, depending on the interconnection. You can get them to have the backup battery and solar so that they can have their refrigeration, they can have if they need oxygen, that can work, those core services. And we're also excited at Generac that beyond our residential solutions, we also have commercial and industrial solutions. We just announced this week also, or last week, an acquisition of a microgrid inverter company. And we have an industrial size battery. So we are really well positioned. We've participated in some microgrids, but we are really well positioned to be a microgrid solution provider, which again, in remote communities, whether they are areas that are affected by wildfires in California, some of the ones that are really hard to serve areas, rather than spending literally, billions of dollars undergrounding wires to try to get there, you can have solutions that recognize that remote areas might be better served by microgrids. And so those are just so essential for, one, making sure we can try to do something to have a resilient grid, but also make make resiliency solutions that are affordable for everybody.
I was just gonna say that.
That because it's all the ratepayers we have to be concerned about. So yes, these are essential services at this point. Resiliency is, and I think there was a hurricane this week in New Orleans. A month ago it was Texas. I mean, it literally, you cannot go beyond a month without, or weeks often, without having some part of our country impacted. And it's just great to see. And, out on the floor, I'm very proud of Generac's technology, but it's just great to see
There's a lot out there.
so many resiliency solutions. And, I think my first, we called it SPI, but RE Plus now, was in 2016. And so this is probably my sixth one. But, in 2016, we did not have a lot of residential batteries, So what you see on the floor now is quite different. And it's not been that long, right? And so, I'll give you another example that's exciting at our booth at Generac is that we also acquired ecobee, which is a smart thermostat company. And one of the things that people have been really excited about in seeing our new battery there is that it's connected to our thermostat. And so if folks want to see how their battery is operating, you can see it right on your smart thermostat.
Yeah.
Nice.
And that smart thermostat is also, our vision is to have that be a control for the home. So as people get EV chargers, or maybe they have a water heater, or, any of these, the electrification that is happening, that they're going to be able to see it's going to be accessible. People might have an app on their phone, but it's really nice. Everybody's accustomed to looking at their thermostat to understand how their home is heated or their air conditioning is working. So we're really excited to help build this home ecosystem and help people be more engaged with the energy that they're using, hopefully conserving, as well.
I'm super curious. We could talk to you all day long. There's so many questions that we have, but quickly, it's super clear how the general public can benefit from having a generator, right? But when you talk about microgrids and the opportunities for community solar and how that would work, how do we engage? How do we make that prospect even more real in communities that need it most? And it might be a question about local public policy engagement, but I'd be curious to have any thoughts about that.
I think it's a really important opportunity right now. I actually participated in the Grid Architecture Forum here yesterday, where we have a lot of really smart engineers and people from the government labs that have been looking at ways that we can do grid services, microgrids, grid architecture. And one of the things I talked about is just the need for us to communicate the value of resiliency to regulators. There's been lots of efforts in the last decade on valuation of distributed resources, and most of them do not put a value on resilience or reliability. It is hard to do, but I think we need to do it because, if you look at, even in just a neighborhood, if I were to have a battery in my house and I had a neighbor who had a medical problem, and I do have solar, they could come over in an emergency. I mean, there is value, obviously, in just getting more of this anywhere in the system, because it is going to help be a resource in times of emergency. But an organized way through a microgrid. And there is a very good example that IREC is part of in Puerto Rico that has created a microgrid in a remote mountainous area of Puerto Rico. And that microgrid supports the health services, the local community center, emergency services. And I think we need to find a way to make sure that we're showing that isn't just doing the value of energy. It is doing the value of allowing kids to continue to go to school. It's allowing people to avoid medical problems. But how we encompass that so that we can get regulators to support that and not get into these debates about it's a cost shift or it's only a personal benefit, and that is something that, maybe this kind of podcast can help get that word out there.
Absolutely.
Because the current system isn't working. And when it fails, there are real, there are people who die, right?
Right.
There are people who, kids who don't go to school. There are real impacts of this, and it's something that I've been trying to figure out how to help communicate. But I think it is the next frontier. A similar issue that's getting a lot of attention here at the show, which is good, are virtual power plants, right? Or I think people are now trying to call them distributed power plants. But the idea is, we now know, and we have the technology, that even when I do have the individual systems in my home, that they can be aggregated and they can provide real benefits in resiliency and reliability and reduction in cost to the system that are not being fully accounted for yet.
Yep.
So I think we need our regulatory teams to start going out and really arguing that it's time to account for these in these different valuation proceedings.
I think there's a lot of ways to measure value.
Yeah.
Right. So the final point on that, I think, is political. And that's where SIA can come in and play a key role, because even if you can assign a monetary value, from a political perspective, when the lights go out, it's bad for everybody, and it's bad for the politicians in those districts. So making that very clear every time it happens is part of our strategy, and making sure that the solutions are put right out front whenever that happens.
Yeah, and I just think, you mentioned kind of using forums like this to accelerate the conversation about how we're changing how we value these resources. I just, we get so lost in the acronyms and the VPPs and the market programs and the utility programs, but understanding what a customer values, what they need, and what, we as a community of people who all rely on the grid need, and trying to find better ways of having that conversation as these technologies are rapidly expanding. Like, there's so many things in the home. And I love that Generac is thinking about, the thermostat and the battery and the controller and the inverter and all these different pieces, but trying to distill it down to something manageable for a customer to understand, both for themselves and the way that they're consuming and storing energy at home, but also how they can benefit the broader grid. So as you have been building out this kind of, public policy infrastructure at Generac, are there sort of principles or ways of thinking about this, as we're thinking about VPPs or other mechanisms that are central to what you think customers need, or maybe policymakers need to understand? What are the key pillars that you would focus on?
Well, I do think, it's an interesting question in terms of how we're thinking of it in the company. I mean, right now, I'd say for the last couple of years, we've been very focused on really looking at the products that we have and how we can make them to make sure this is stuck here to make sure that we're advancing technology, we're making them easy for customers to use, we're making them so they're affordable. We are trying to ensure customers are going to be able to take advantage of the incentives that are out there. There's a lot of different elements, right, when you're in product development, which was one of the exciting things for me when I came to Generac. Is that they are a manufacturer, right? They've built products. They've tried to respond to not just the needs of the customers, but the distributors. And how do you then make sure you've got the processes to respond to the customers again? So it's been really interesting, that focus, and the very smart engineers and technical people that I've been able to interact with here. But I think in terms of one of the advantages I can bring to Generac, though, is to bring the outside in, in terms of, what are regulators looking for?
Right.
What are policymakers looking for? I mean, the Department of Energy has played such an important role here, and the federal government, in the last 2 years, right? I mean, everything with the IRA and the infrastructure bill, and then the great work that's been done by the Grid Resiliency or Grid Deployment Office and the Battery Incentive Office. I mean, to see that kind of level of leadership at the federal level to really try to think about how are we going to transform, really clean energy, right, and provide these opportunities, for me to be able to bring some of that into a company like Generac, has been really, really meaningful to me and to my team. But I also think it's been helpful for us to be able to bring some of the experience from inside these companies back out, right? So that, we spent a lot of time with the California Energy Commission over the last 2 years as they were developing their basically demand response programs, emergency response programs called the DSGS, Demand Side Grid.
Speaking of acronyms,
Right. I'm forgetting right now. We just always call it DSGS, Grid Services, maybe. But it's an emergency demand response program that grew out of California being concerned about what was happening, 2 years ago with the wildfires and with some of the outages. And, they had a very open proceeding that we engaged with quite a bit. And out of it now has come a number of different options where we're seeing batteries can participate, grid, even generator controllers can participate. And now, I think they're looking at better ways, hopefully, that we can find our thermostats to participate. So, a recognition by these government agencies that you want to make sure that the industry's voices can come to the table and consumer organizations can come to the table, and we can get some of these programs really off the ground.
Yeah.
I think is really important right now.
Yeah.
Exciting.
I wonder if we could ask you about what it is like to partner with SIA on some of these federal and state policy priorities, and what maybe some folks who aren't, or companies that aren't members yet, could benefit from that.
So I have been an active SIA member. I was on the board in the past. I'm not on the board right now. Maybe one day. And obviously, I think SIA has played a really important role on the federal level for absolutely, right? I mean, everything that was done in passing the IRA, in working with DOE, I think some of the work at FERC, has been, incredibly valuable, and kudos to SIA for everything there. On the state level, I think SIA plays an important role too in the different regional organizations. My team has focused a lot with the storage committee, and so I think that's been great. Joan and I were on a podcast together the other day, and she's like a super resource, and I think really valuable, particularly for smaller, I have a smaller team now than I had in the past. And so being able to have a committee that you can join a call and get updates of what's going on. We are really hoping that in the year to come, there are going to be more storage incentives, more VPP legislation, that having that central resource, I think, could be very valuable and worthwhile. And there are ways that smaller companies can participate in SIA at a lower dollar level, which is really important. And so that has been super valuable. And the other valuable resource for me has been your tax people.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I really appreciate the responsiveness, again, as a company that, is not quite at the level maybe of some other companies, but we have needs.
Yeah.
And particularly as we're trying to make our way through understanding domestic content, the production tax credit, some of the different guidance that's coming out, that is also really valuable. So, kudos to the staff. I appreciate the responsiveness, and obviously this trade meeting, and the conference is something that SIA has been, really the driver of, right? So many of the participants are SIA members, and I know that, and I think, this has been a great opportunity for Generac certainly to come and show our new products, and to, I always love participating, in the sessions here. So yes, lots of value from SIA, and I really appreciate it.
That's great.
That's cool. Maybe more than any other market segment, we see that hockey stick forecast for the storage industry. So it's going to be super exciting to see how that evolves over the next 5 to 10 RE plus.
Yeah, as you noted, it's completely different now than it was just a few years ago. And so, you mentioned that there's just such a sea change in the technologies that are on the show floor. Where do you think, let's say we're back here in 5 years at RE plus, what do you think that's going to look like? Any visions for the challenges or the opportunities that are coming forward?
Well, I think that, hey, you're going to run out of places that you can operate, that can have this show.
I know.
I really like Anaheim versus I'll just give you that vote. I find it more manageable here than maybe last year. But I think you're growing that way. We know that there's going to be, I think controls are like sort of this next level, right? Some of the work that we're doing, whether it's the controls inside the home, like we're doing with our thermostat, or the microgrid controller that I mentioned about, because really what we're talking about is you've got all of these distributed resources, out there in the system. We are going to, we're increasingly hearing utilities say, oh no, how are we going to know what's happening on the grid? I think that's a really interesting area. I was just speaking with a former colleague, before I came on here, who works on, issues at the edge of the grid and the data access, privacy issues, all of those issues that come to play when you have a lot of distributed resources.
Right.
The great thing about distributed resources is they really do improve resiliency because you don't have these single points of failure, right? The challenging thing about them is we could start to have, I used to call it a million points of light or whatever. But, we're gonna have millions of points of energy.
Yeah.
And there is an issue, I think, a legitimate issue of how does that interact with the grid? What is the role with the utilities? I would have liked to have seen more utilities here. I know that there were some around and different players here. I think it's something that with SIA and SEPA both being co-owners, I guess, of RE Plus, of this conference, is to really think about how do we move to that level of, we've had a history. I've been part of that history, where there's been a lot of tension at times with the utilities. But now that we're actually a very, very important player, we are not a niche player in the energy system. And I think you say 5 years from now, we are definitely, distributed resources are going to be the critical source of power and activity on the grid. So how could we bring more of that into this? And then the other area that I would love to see more of are more public officials here.
Yeah.
Right.
Where are the regulators? They should want to be here to learn about this technology, right? And to interact with us and to see all the great things that are happening. And, we certainly had some. I know David Crane, Deputy Secretary was here. And I'm sure that you've invited a lot of them. But I think we really need to say it's time to come here and see what's happening. You're not going to see it all at NARUC. Yeah. You could see a lot of things here. And we could craft programs around it to meet their needs as well.
Yeah.
That's really good. That's great feedback.
Yeah.
I think we're thinking along those same lines.
Yeah. And it's just so great to see it up close and personal. And it's such a physical product, all these different tools and services that you can really understand a little bit better when you really see it on the show floor. So
I think so.
Well, that's good. I think we've got our work cut out for us to keep the tent growing and make sure we have everybody at the table. So, well, Ann, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you've got to jet to an airport.
Yes,
so,
I'm going to go home, and thank you, Sia, for having me and for doing another great show.
Yeah,
it's been a fun week, so appreciate it.
We'll
Thank
be
you
back
so much.
again next year.
All right. Yep. Thanks.
Ann.
Bye.